There we go. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We're going to go over the Portland Relocation Fee Ordinance. Today, the vast majority of you are attending for free because it is paid for by a grant, a landlord education grant provided by the Portland Housing Bureau in the city of Portland. Yeah, so thank you for being here. I appreciate it. My name is Christian Bryant. For those of you who don't know, I'm president of the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, president of the Northwest Real Estate Investor Association, president of the Central Oregon Real Estate Investor Association, as well as, of course, I run my own property management company, IRC Real Estate and Property Management, that manages long-term rentals as well as vacation rentals in the Portland metro area, as far south as the Salem, Albany, Eugene area, as well as we have offices in Central Oregon, covering the Bend, Redmond area too. And I've, been doing that for, 14, almost 15 years now, something to that effect. I've offered services like in addition to full management, doing things like placement service, where we do the advertising, do the showings, find you a tenant, do the leasing, do the screening, approval, denial, do all the leasing paperwork, the move-in inspection, then turn it back over to an owner to manage after that, as well as, of course, eviction processing in those areas, to where if you just need a cheaper option than hiring an attorney to handle your basic eviction, we'll be able to take care of that for you, serving the proper notices, reviewing the notices you may or may not have sent, making sure the proper ones are sent, filing all the FD evictions, all that good stuff. And then, of course, being the chairman of the Rental Services Committee for the city of Portland, since it was incorporated actually back, I think, when this law was created, the Relocation Fee Ordinance, or it might have been actually with the Fair Ordinance, where it was created for a number of years, to where even though my voice wasn't always heard, I was one of the landlord representative voices in trying to not negotiate, but point out unintended consequences and shave down the sharp edges, so to speak, of laws like this that we're going to be talking about today. One thing, please keep an eye on the chat. In there, our admin manager, Patrick Singh, is in the chat. And he's going to want to make sure, like, if any of you paid extra for the CE credits, all that stuff, make sure that your name in Zoom is accurate based on your registration, your license, so everything connected. Oh, I don't have my little clicker plugged in. Give me 1 second here. Great. There we go. All right, cool. Main disclaimers. I am not an attorney. As you've heard, I wear a lot of different hats. I have a lot of experience. But today I am not establishing an attorney-client relationship with you guys, or giving anything that can officially be considered legal advice. With that said, one thing I would say to all my fellow landlords out there: don't be scared of landlords or attorneys that represent landlords. Quite honestly, I would argue knowing which landlord attorney you're going to call, if you happen to ever need them, in my opinion, is the same as knowing what emergency plumber you're going to call if you happen to need them for, some leak in the middle of the night or something like that. Hopefully you never ever have to use them. You don't ever have to talk to them or have a conversation with them. But in the rare event that you do need a landlord attorney, it is good to know who you're going to call before that happens. So definitely do your own research. Make sure you do find out in your area where you have rental properties, what landlord attorney you're going to call. And if you have landlord rental properties in different areas throughout the state or in other states, do your research in those areas as well. Hopefully you never have to use them, but it is one of those things where, hey, sometimes stuff happens. And as a landlord, maybe maybe you responded to something with emotion and how you felt was right, but you're not sure. Maybe that crossed some legal line or something like that. Or you run into a problem with that rare tenant to where you're going to possibly have to do an eviction or something like that. It might be cheaper, excuse me, to run it by an attorney, pay them, $500 or so for official consulting on the front end, just to try and make sure you avoid possibly having to hire that same attorney at a much more expensive rate to actually represent you in person in court. So worth looking into that. I, though, am not an attorney. I can handle your basic eviction processing stuff, about half the cost of an attorney for all that. But if it ends up actually going to court and being a trial, then I do pass it off to an attorney, because the reality is I know my limitations. Someone who practices in court in that area, in that county on a daily basis, is going to have a better understanding of which way the judges might lean, no matter what the law says in that area. Feel free to ask questions as we go through the class. I've been teaching this class for a few, I don't know, probably like 4 years now or so for the city of Portland. And so I've got it fairly dialed in. I cover most majority of your typical questions throughout the class. With that said, if you have a question that pops up that is on topic for what we're talking about today, please use a separate Q&A section, not the regular chat window. The separate Q&A section, post questions in there for me to read aloud and answer as part of the class. In there, you should also have the ability, let me just double check here, the settings are right. Yeah, you'll have the ability to where if there's a question in there that I haven't answered yet, and it's similar to yours, you can just click a little thumbs up button. And the more thumbs up a question gets, when I get to questions, that'll have a higher priority on my side and I'll answer first. Also, you can add follow-up things. So maybe something I'm talking about and it goes, oh, hey, what about this situation? And a question I already asked, or maybe I answer your question as part of the class. You can add a little follow-up of saying, hey, skip this question, you already answered it. And then all of us get saved the time going through reading through that. Excuse me. You can ignore the please turn the phones to silent mode. I won't know otherwise, just for bandwidth issues, to make sure we have the highest probability of people not getting cut off because of internet connections and stuff. I have all of your guys' microphones and cameras turned off automatically. I would have to turn them on in order for you to use them. That's purely what it's for, just so that people don't accidentally get disconnected by only having my video and audio being transmitted. It's a one-way thing, uses a lot less bandwidth, just makes it a little more enjoyable for everybody. If for some reason you have any issues with typing your question or something like that, just go ahead and shoot me a private message if you can, or when you raise your hand, let me know. And if absolutely needed, I will go ahead and turn on your audio so you can ask the question verbally if that's something you require for one reason or another. Excuse me. Yeah, this last one's pretty straightforward. All right. So before we dive into it, looks like Mr. Kaufman, Neil, you already did it in the chat, so you don't need to do it again. But for anyone else, if you paid the extra price to be able to get continuing education credit for your property management or real estate broker license in the state of Oregon, please go ahead and do a beginning of class check-in in the regular webinar chat window. That is name as it appears in your license, license number, and broker affiliation. If you can include all that stuff in there, then we can make sure you get your CE credits. For anyone that's wondering, because it is a question that comes up occasionally, the reason we have to charge extra for CE credits for these classes that are paid for by the city of Portland is that grant has to be quote unquote all inclusive and can't actually cover the cost of anything related to like professional licensing and stuff like that. It's just the general attendance for anyone in our society. That's what they're paying for. So to abide by those grant requirements and everything, that's why we have that extra charge for those continuing education credits. So yeah, sorry, it is what it is. If you take any of the classes from the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, you're already a member, you automatically get credits. if outside of these ones that are free, paid for by the city of Portland. Also with rpmeducation.org, if you sign up through there, we have lots of classes that you have to pay extra for the city of Portland doesn't cover, and you always have that option of getting those CE credits too. Okay, and that's everything. Let me do one more clearing of the throat and we'll get moving on. Let's check message real quick. That's weird. Sorry, just got a couple people that are having issues getting into the class, so just forwarding on to the IT team to make sure they get taken care of. Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, so we'll jump into it. Oh, there we go. So the Portland relocation fee ordinance, first thing to know is that what we're talking about today only applies, 100% only applies to rental units that are located within the city limits of Portland. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you operate your business as a landlord, property manager, rental property owner. It doesn't matter where you're located, where you have your official business incorporation filed as, any of that. Only thing that matters is the rental property in question that the tenants live in, is that located within the city limits of Portland. So also something that's confusing for people, this has nothing to do with any county. It has nothing to do with Multnomah County or Clackamas County or Washington County, any of those counties. This is specific to the city limits of Portland. So with that comes a little bit of a confusion issue. Zip codes and city boundaries, they didn't talk to each other when they decided to make them. City boundaries expand on a regular basis. Zip codes seem to be a bit more stagnant, but nonetheless, just because the mailing address of your rental property says Portland on it, doesn't necessarily mean it's actually within the city limits of Portland. For instance, my own personal house, recently got it a few years ago out in the Bethany area where all the new construction's happening, blah, blah, blah. Our address, my mailing address, is Portland, Oregon, based on the zip code. With that said, we are in an unincorporated county. We're not actually in any city, and we don't, if I rented out my own personal house, I would not have to abide by any of the laws I'm talking about today, even though my address is Portland, Oregon. And that is because those boundaries don't talk to each other. So something, if you have a rental property, or honestly, even if you own your own personal property, anywhere close to or within the city of Portland limits, you should have this website saved in your quick links or whatever. And that is portlandmaps.com. So it's right on here. If you're in this class, you also got the email, obviously, with the link with the shared folder, cloud-based folder. And in there is a PDF printer-friendly version of all these slides. You'd be able to copy and paste it. But just in case, Patrick, would you go ahead and toss the link for portlandmaps.com in the webinar chat, if you could, just so that way people can click it and save it, and or copy and paste if they need to. If you go into that website, portlandmaps.com, enter in the address of your rental property. Again, doesn't matter where you're located as the manager or landlord or owner, but if you enter in the address of your rental property, then the first thing that'll come up is a nice description of everything to know about your property, the tax requirements, property tax requirements, school districts, it's in the zoning that it has, the utilities that it services, it, all of that good stuff. And if your property is located within the city of Portland, it'll be plain as day, it's right there. If it's not located within the city of Portland, even though the address said so, the first thing you'll see on that screen after you do a search for your address is a nice bright yellow highlighted disclaimer that says, this property is not located within the city limits of Portland, therefore we can't guarantee any of the information. If you see that when you look up your rental property, you don't need to know this law. It does not apply to that rental property. you don't need to deal with it. It only applies for rental properties that are located within those city limits. Hold on 1 second here. Okay. So we should get that link to portlandmaps.com in the website, in the webinar chat here any minute. All right. Am I still clicked on? No, of course not. So for the city of Portland, the relocation fee ordinance. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of my class, the intro, is if you do happen to have, if anything I'm talking about spurs a question that you have that's not actually on topic for the relocation fee ordinance, but is in the general landlord tenant subject arena, go ahead and make a note of that, save it at the end. I always schedule myself to stick around for at least 15 minutes to be able to answer any questions related to the landlord tenant general category. So do know if you do have questions that come up that aren't specific to this, you'll be able to ask those questions at the end. All right, so for the city of Portland relocation fee ordinance, one of the big things everyone knows is that, hey, the rent increase is limit in the city of Portland is limited to 10% or more. The other thing that triggers it is if you issue a no cause termination for any reason or decide to not renew or lease, which by state law is now a no cause termination, or you have a substantial change to lease terms, which pretty much sticks with, excuse me, the basically if you have a major change to the overall monthly cost of living, essentially. But big thing to point out is that with the rent increase of 10% or more, that is not a legal limit in the sense that if you raise it by more than 10%, it's just illegal and doesn't count. As I'm sure a lot of you know, our state rent increase limit, excuse me, sorry guys, that is a actual law is 14.6% this year. So the last couple of years has actually been under 10%, so the difference hasn't really mattered. But now, as far as the state law is concerned, you can't raise it by more than 14.6%, which means if you raise your rent on a current tenant by enough to where it's 14.6% plus 1 penny, it's actually illegal. It doesn't even count. The tenant doesn't have to pay it. And if they want, they can require you to pay them, I think it's like 2 times the rent amount as a penalty plus their lawyer fees, blah, 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 blah. It's officially illegal. That is not what this is. The 10% amount in Portland is a limit that just triggers the possibility of a relocation fee. It does not mean you can't legally raise the rent by more than 10%. If you are one of those investors, which there's plenty out there to where this is their area of investing. I mean, being the president of the Northwest Real Estate Investor Association and president of the Central Oregon Real Estate Investor Association, which Patrick, if you're listening, go ahead and post the links to both of those in the chat if you could. Being president of those, I can tell you, it's not all of them. There's, not a huge amount, but there are some real estate investors to where they make their profit by finding those properties, those rental properties to where someone has owned it for, 20, 30, 50 years. They haven't done a ton of updates. Maybe in the last 10 years, they haven't really done any rent increases. And so based on, the cost, the income approach and everything, the value, is established a little bit lower than market. You're able to buy that, do renovations, rent it out for a bit more, et cetera, et cetera. Or just simply, you just need to catch up who's there to market rates. You are more than welcome to raise your rent by more than 10%, as long as you don't cross that of course, state level. Hold on 1 second. All right. When you cross that limit, it's not illegal. Like if you're one of those investors and say you've got a rental property that you just purchased, got a good deal on it because it needs upgrades, it has way below market rents. Let's say those market rents are 20% below the current market rents. You are more than welcome to go ahead and raise your rent by the full state allowed 14.6% here in 2023. With that said, what the Portland relocation fee means, or what it does, is make it to where if the amount that you raise it is more than 10%, the tenant has the option to say, that's too expensive for me to afford to live here. I have to move, and you need to pay me the relocation fee. If, let's say, your rentals, like the example I had, are 20% below market, and you raise it by 14%, or close to or the maximum or whatever, they do some shopping around, they'll realize, oh wait, for this $2,000 a month rental, it is currently being at call it, let's say it's 5% or so below market rent. I'm actually going to save $100 a month if I stay here rather than move. In those instances, no relocation fee is owed. You are allowed to raise your rent by more than 10% without crossing the state threshold for their rent increase, which this year is 14.6. And if the tenant looks at it and decides, I'm not going to move, this is still a better deal than I could get otherwise, you owe no relocation fee. So what matters is if you raise your rent by exactly or more than 10%, and the tenant chooses or decides that's more expensive, I'm too expensive for me, I'm going to move, and no, there's no burden of proof for the tenant to prove it's too expensive for them. They just get to say, I'm moving because you're raising your rent by more than 10%. You owe them that relocation fee. Also, if you serve a no cause termination, which was state law SB 608, Senate Bill 608, that was passed, it was pre-COVID. I don't know, I want to say 4 years ago. Don't quote me on that. Good chance I'm wrong. Between having kids and the COVID years, I have almost no chance of actually getting the answer right on how long ago something happened. I don't know, totally screwed me up. But nonetheless, it is a law now for state law SB 608 to where you can still give a no cause termination in the first year of occupancy, which, as you'll see here in a bit when I cover that, is still a 90-day notice for rental properties within the city limits of Portland. Or if you give a notice to a tenant to move out that is not a fault of their own, one of the 6 different qualifying reasons, and I just taught that class yesterday. We've got recordings of it available. I'm not going through those as qualifying reasons today because it's not on topic. If you do any of that, then all of it counts as a no cause termination as far as the city of Portland is concerned, and thus triggers the relocation fee that we're talking about today. Substantial change in lease terms. This is not officially explained or defined word for word in the city of Portland law. This is something to where if you made a substantial change in lease terms and that the tenant thought was a substantial change in lease terms, and they said, okay, I'm going to move because of that, I want my relocation fee, and you said, no, it's not a substantial change in lease terms, then you would go to court over it because the tenant would sue you over it, and it would be up to the judge that day on whether or not it was. So I can't tell you this and that is or isn't a substantial change in lease terms. What I can tell you is through my own experience, just running my own management company for the last 15 years, and what we've done as a policy is what we've considered a substantial change in lease terms is anything that changes their monthly expense. So for instance, if we went from we were covering water, sewer, garbage to now this year when you sign a new lease, you as a tenant have to pay the actual cost of water, sewer, garbage. Or, that was a prime example of it. It definitely affects their monthly expense. The other thing that within my own company, we consider a substantial change of lease terms is like pet or smoking. If for some reason we previously allowed them to have a pet, or we previously allowed them to smoke on the property outside or possibly inside, even though we've never allowed that, but just as an example, you get what I'm saying? And then we change it to where, nope, you can't smoke on the property at all. And nope, you can't have that pet that we've already approved of at all. That we would consider a substantial change in lease terms. So again, that's not legal advice and is not spelled out in the law. So unfortunately, as a landlord, for those of you that are landlords that I'm talking to, if you're going to change any lease terms, really be conservative on what you feel like you can get away with, because it is a gray area. And I would never want someone that takes any of my classes to be the people that get used as an example that may or may not create case law, because it's expensive. So be careful on that one. If you are evicting a tenant because they have violated the lease or they have violated landlord-tenant law, which FYI, a lot of landlords don't realize, in Oregon state landlord-tenant law, which is ORS chapter 90, it's very long, but it actually, even if there isn't a lease that exists, it acts as a lease itself. And one of the main reasons, because right towards the middle, I couldn't quote you exactly what chapter or whatever, right towards the middle, there's a whole section on tenant responsibilities, which is, hey, tenant, even if there isn't a lease that exists that you signed a contract for, if you don't follow through on all these tenant responsibilities, you are violating landlord-tenant law and can be evicted. So if you are doing a for-cause eviction for violating a lease or violating landlord-tenant law, either or the tenant gives you a move-out notice and they are voluntarily choosing to move out, then the relocation fee does not apply. It only applies if you are telling the tenant they need to move out through no fault of their own, or you're raising the rent by more than 10% and they decide, I have to move, that's too expensive. All right, John has a question in here. If I make a temporary written agreement with a tenant to reduce rent will be 25% less for the next 3 months, am I still bound by the rental increase limit or at risk of triggering the possible relocation fee? So John, to answer your question, I'll tell you, it probably, number one, definitely not an attorney. It would be worth at least running this by an attorney real quick. But nonetheless, it probably all depends on the exact paperwork or addendum that you and the tenant sign. If it were me and I were dealing with a tenant to where, hey, for whatever reason, my client approved it, who owns the property, blah, 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 doesn't matter the reason. We're going to lower the rent by 25% for the next 3 months for this tenant. I would actually give them an addendum or just a statement or notice letting them know, because technically, since it's lowering money for them, it benefits them. You don't officially have to have their signature. With that said, get their signature anyway. Why not? I would write it as such of, let's say the rent is $2,000 a month, discounted by 25%, takes $500 away. I would write it as such of, for the next 3 months, and I would actually spell out the exact months we're talking about. Not your rent will be 25% less or $500 less if it's $2,000 a month rental, but I would write it as, for the next 3 months, we are going to voluntarily give you a credit of $500 towards your total rent amount of $2,000. So basically, by wording of the contract that you both sign, it is very clear that you are not lowering their rent at all. You are just being a nice landlord and giving them a $500 per month rent credit for the next 3 months, and their rent is still the full amount of $2,000. So I think, again, I'm not an attorney. Please do not take what I just said to the bank. I would trust someone like Michael Ross in Portland, who's a very well-known, experienced attorney, who said, no, Christian, you're wrong, write it this way. I would trust them over me. But within my own company, I would feel probably 80–90% confident that as long as I wrote it as, I'm not lowering your rent, I'm just giving you a credit, then it should be okay. And the rent increase limit won't matter when that credit runs out, because you never changed the rent. You just gave them a monthly rent credit they could take advantage of, and the rent just stayed the same the whole time. So unfortunately, if you're a landlord, that doesn't run your own business, even if you have just one single family home that's a rental property, you're officially a small business. So you got to think about it that way of, okay, sometimes the wording really matters on those agreements and contracts. All right. Let's see here. Doesn't apply for FERC. I talked about that. All right. So the relocation fee amounts, which I will tell you as this goes on, this is a currently debated topic. Quite honestly, I would not be surprised if these amounts change, and there's also a good chance that by the end of this current year, not only will that change, but the way they're calculated might change as like a multiple of the rent amount, or to be automatically adjusted by the economy, like the state law is, or something like that. But as it stands right now, that's what the rental amounts are, or the relocation fees are. If you do something that triggers this relocation fee as early as tomorrow, please don't trust me. These amounts are something that can change based on administrative staff and committee meetings at the Portland Housing Bureau. I mean, technically it should go through city councilors and everything, have an official vote, but it's also somewhat falls under administrative rules. So again, don't trust me tomorrow, just trust me today. If you're going to do something that might trigger a relocation fee tomorrow, look up the Portland Rental Housing, or the Portland Housing Bureau, the Rental Services Office, look up this current law, the current administrative rules, and make sure it's accurate. At the end of this class, I think on the very last slide, I have all their websites and everything, but also have a lot of that information like shared cloud folders too. Let's see here. The other thing on this, so 1, 2, 3 bedroom, all the way up to 4,500. For a lot of people within the Portland metro area, there are properties just, on kind of the outskirts of the city of Portland, the city limits, and that are, these 10 bedroom, 8 bathroom houses. They're not like crazy expensive mansions, but they've got a lot of space. So there are plenty of landlords in Portland that use that as an excuse to rent it out room by room. And, the hallways and the living room, the kitchen are all common area, and they're able to rent it out room by room at a separate lease for each room. If that is the case, then each one of those rooms, each one of those separate leases counts as a studio single bedroom. So it's 5 bedrooms. You're looking at 5 bedrooms, 10,000 plus 4,500, so 14,500 in relocation fees. But in that 5 bedroom, you could also go ahead and just rent it out as one big house on one lease with 5 different roommates that all sign on and off on it. Now it's only a $4,500 relocation fee. So not a reason to for sure change your business practice, but worth considering. And as you'll see later, when it comes into registration per door and the $60 per fee you pay, there's also that added thing. Let's see here. If you pay your state, and there's the other thing. If what you do triggers both the state and the city relocation fee, then you only pay the one that is the largest. They don't stack. So if you trigger a $4,500 relocation fee with the city of Portland, and the state one is 1 month's rent, it's like $2,500. You only have to pay the $4,500. All right. Let's see. We're almost exactly halfway, it looks like. So we're going to take a quick break. I'll give you about 5 minutes, and we'll be right back. And we're back. So for City of Portland, if you do a rent increase, you're required to make it a 90-day notice. Or you add 4 days for mailing. Technically, the law says add 3 days for mailing, but you're not allowed to actually, when you mail it, you're not allowed to actually count the day you put it in the mail. That's why I put 4 days on there. That way, if you miscalculate 3 days, you don't get to come back and complain to me about it, so to speak. So yeah, 90 days, 4 days for mailing. If for the state ordinance SB 608, this is something just a flag for you to look up if you haven't already taken my free class on that. And that is that for state law SB 608, it says for the first year of occupancy, you can give a 30-day no cause notice. If you have a rental property within the city limits of Portland, you need to use the 90-day notice, and it still qualifies for all the state stuff and all that stuff, which in the first year isn't really anything, but you still have to give the 90-day notice, and all this counts. You must include a description of their rights and obligations as a City of Portland rent tenant. There's a nice link there. With that said, if you wait till the very last slide, I have the website and everything for the Portland Housing Bureau Rental Services Office. If you go there, you can get the current, updated, most recent version of this document. If you raise, if you raise the rent by 10% or more, which also includes total housing costs. So this is where that whole substantial change of lease terms come in when I talked about housing costs. If in any rolling 12-month period, which the state law, which limits rent increases, is on the calendar year, okay? Like currently in 2023, you can't raise the rent by more than 14.6%. Officially, January 2024, you have the complete new rent increase limit to deal with, which we won't know until end of September of this year. And so, but within the city of Portland, the 10% limit not only applies to a rolling 12-month period, which means anytime you do a rent increase, you need to look back at how much of a rent increase has happened in the last 12 months, which also means, hey, if you purchased a rental property that has a tenant in it in the last 12 months and you want to do a rent increase, you absolutely need to make it a condition of the purchase offer that you give that seller, that they provide you with a copy of the last rent increase notice they provided. Because if they gave a rent increase notice at any time prior to you purchasing the property, that would mean it is less than 12 months prior to you wanting to do your own rent increase, then it counts. So, if it's a $2,000 a month rental, to trigger the rent increase limit, you'd have to raise it by $200 a month. If 1 month before you bought it, they raised it by $100, then you might be limited to only $100 as far as your increase goes. So make sure that is one thing that this law also makes it to where if you're purchasing a rental property, make sure you use a real estate agent like myself that specializes in helping clients buy and sell rental properties with tenants in them, because there are little things like this that you're going to want to make sure you require when you actually purchase that property, that you get that information so that you don't accidentally violate this law, because unfortunately, ignorance is not a defense when it comes to being a landlord. I don't agree with that. I think ignorance should be a defense, since the Portland Tenants United actually did a whole study, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago of the Portland metro area, and found that it was in the high 40%. I'm going to say 46, but I feel like it was closer to 48, 46% of rental properties within the entire Portland metro area were owned by landlords that have less than 4 units, which means they've got mortgages, they've got a day job, they're not rich by any stretch of the imagination, and things like this really matter. So make sure you are following up on that. When it comes to that 10%, if you're buying a new rental property or something, make sure you actually get documentation from that seller of how they officially raised rent the last time, if it was any time within the last 12 months. Housing costs, this is included in that. So if the seller I mean, it could be you who's just owned it for a while, or the seller of a property you just bought. If they recently changed it, maybe they didn't raise the rent, but they recently changed the lease terms to where instead of including water, sewer, garbage in the rental amount, they now are charging the tenant for water, sewer, the actual cost of water, sewer, garbage. That change counts towards the 10%. So if that happened, it's a $2,000 a month rental, and they didn't raise the rent in the last 12 months, but they did change it from utility, the utility thing, and that cost the tenant an extra $150 a month. Then they did that last month. Then for the next 11 months, the most you can raise the rent is $50, because that would get it up to the 10%. Hell, I would say $49 or $49.99, because you want to keep it just below the 10% limit. So that is just something. It is part of the law, of course. Well, as part of the Rental Services Commission and chairing it, I definitely spoke out against it. I made my voice as heard as it was willing to be when New Daly was in office, and then I was, of course, ignored. But whether we like it or not, that is how things are set in Portland, to where if you raise the total monthly housing cost, not just rent, but just total monthly housing cost by 10% or more, then the tenant could choose to take a relocation fee and move. Again, I can't stress enough, if you raising it by 10% or more of total housing cost still keeps it below average market rents, to where if they move, they're going to pay even more to have the same kind of place. You're not in violation of the law. As long as you're not violating the state law of 14.6 this year, you can do whatever you want. And as long as it's still a good deal for that tenant and they're saving money by staying there, then odds are they're not going to move. Obviously, there's always a chance they've got family to move into and they use that as an excuse, blah, blah, blah. But typically, just know, hey, my unit, it's 20% under market. You can probably raise it by 14%, and that tenant's not going to go anywhere, because they also realize, oh, hey, you're still a nice landlord giving me a deal. On that $2,000 a month rental, it's still 5% below market. You're saving me $100 a month. I could move, have all the cost of moving, and have you, of course, cover that, but then it costs me an extra $100 a month in perpetuity. So it's not a hard, fast law. It's just something to make sure you consider if you're thinking of raising that rent. And it does not apply during turnover. So if you have a tenant, if you are looking at, hey, I need to set my rent to advertise it for the new tenant, this doesn't apply at all. You're not limited to 10% at all. The only reason for this law is to make it so that people can stay living in their homes. Has nothing to do with people being able to afford to move into a new place. And therefore, if you raise this rent and everything, it only applies to a current tenant that you're raising it on. If that tenant moves out for any reason and you decide I'm going to raise the rent all the way up to market and it's 20% higher, perfectly fine. Let's see, I already explained the first part. So after you give this rent increase, AG just asked, can tenants take relocation out of state? Before I answer your question, AG, can you give me a follow-up of, do you mean if they move out of state, or are you? Well, no, it doesn't matter. I can actually answer your question. This only applies for rental properties within the city of Portland, period. Doesn't matter where they're going. If they don't currently live in a property that's within the state, or i.e. not in the city of Portland, it doesn't apply. If they're moving to Timbuktu, doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is what we're talking about today. So the idea of them being an out-of-state tenant, I think the answer is just no across the board. It doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is, are they currently living in a rental property that you manage or own that is within the city limits of Portland? If I didn't answer your question, if I misunderstood it, please go ahead and repost it. Okay. Once you give a rent increase or a total monthly housing increase that is 10% or more, the tenant actually has up to 45 days from that time that you give the notice to request a relocation fee. Again, as I've already said many times, if they intend to move because of the rent increase. If you give them a rent increase and they just don't like it, but they also realize it's still better than we can get it elsewhere and we're not moving, you owe nothing. There's nothing to owe. Once the tenant requests that fee, anytime in that 45 days. So you could serve it today and they tell you tomorrow, and you've got 31 days from tomorrow. Or you could serve it today and 45 days from today, they request it, and 31 days from that day, you have the option. So it could be anywhere from, I guess, 32 up to 76 days after you post the notice. It all depends on, you have 31 days after the tenant officially requests the relocation fee, because they're going to have to move because of your rent increase. You have 31 days from there to pay them the corresponding relocation fee. Another thing, it is treated as a separate transaction. So this is where, if any of you, so a separate transaction, what that means is if your tenant owes you, let's say $1,000 for Jimmy kicking a soccer ball through that front window that you fixed, 2 months ago. If they owe you that money, it doesn't matter. You owe them this relocation fee. You have to cut them a check for the full relocation fee, and you are not allowed to deduct anything from it. It is considered a completely separate transaction. Now, any of you landlords that rolled your eyes or was like, are you serious, or balked at what I just said at all, I would argue you really need to spend the money to take my class that I teach once every 3 months on tenant violations. Because if a tenant currently owes you money, there's absolutely no goddamn reason to trigger a relocation fee. If a tenant currently owes you money, remember when I talked about state law ORS chapter 90, which is the state landlord tenant law, acts as its own lease. There's a whole section in the middle that talks about tenant responsibilities. One of the many items listed there is that a tenant is responsible for paying all debts owed to their landlord. So therefore, if you've got a tenant, let's say they owe you $1,000 for little Jimmy breaking that window, and of course, excuse me, as you've taken lots of my classes, you know that, hey, broken window, exposure to the exterior elements, that's a habitability issue. Maybe it's a clogged drain, it's also a habitability issue. It's the tenant's responsibility. Sorry about that, guys. In those situations, yes, you're required by law to get it fixed right away, make sure the place is habitable. But then you get to give a reasonable amount of time to that tenant to pay you back, because it's their responsibility by law. Forget about what your lease says. The law actually says they are. And therefore, you're able to give them a reasonable amount of time. The reason I use quotes is because a reasonable amount of time is not defined by the law. Within my own company, we give them 30 days because, hell, if I charge something on my credit card, I have 30 days to pay it off before I have interest. Just as an American society, I personally feel like we've accepted 30 days is what we have to pay things. There are plenty of large management companies out there to where their reasonable amount of time to pay that debt is 10 days. And they haven't been sued over it, haven't been any problem. So for me personally, I would say what I do is 30 days. I'm comfortable with suggesting that, but I also know of, gosh, I don't know, at least 20 plus, probably more than that, property management companies that are much closer to 10 days. And I know of property management associations to where their default on the forms that you purchase and stuff is 10 days, to where anything between 10 and 30 days is fine. Pick one, bill your tenant for it, because FYI, this here is a whole 90-day process, blah, blah, blah. Bill your tenant for that money that they owe you. And this also comes into fruition when it comes to the no cause notice and stuff like that. Bill your tenant, and then they've got 30 days, maybe 10, but let's call it 30 days to pay you back. And then they don't. And then after that, you give them what I call a 1430 notice, which is actually a 30-day general termination notice, which is you've got 14 days to fix this problem, i.e. you've got another 14 days to pay this money. Or on the 30th day, you have to move out by law. You're no longer allowed to live here. And on the 32nd day, or whatever the next day is, the courts are open, I get to file an FED eviction and officially force you out, which all of that stuff, if you end up forcing them out as for cause eviction, you owe 0 relocation fees. So if tenant owes you $1,000 and your relocation fee might be 4,500 or so, then what the hell? Force them to pay it or move out. I mean, worst case scenario is they take the 10 or 30 days you give them, somewhere in between, to pay it, and then you get $1,000, and that offsets what you have to pay them in a relocation fee by $1,000. Best case scenario is they don't follow through. You evict them. You hire someone like me that costs you, $500, and you do a full eviction, and they're gone, and you never had to pay your relocation fee of $4,500, and you saved a ton of money. So keep that in mind when you're going down this path. Is, hey, I know it's a separate transaction. Christian told me if I'm going to pay them this relocation fee, it's going to be the hardest check I ever have to write. If I'm actually writing a check to someone that owes me money, maybe I should look at what my rights are as a landlord to force them to pay me that money before I pull this trigger. So obviously timing, how quickly you want things to happen, finances, personal finances, stuff like that. A lot of things come into play. But when it comes down to it, I would argue you're probably better off as a landlord of enforcing the laws that already back you up versus just biting the bullet and paying a relocation fee. After you pay that tenant, or after they claim I need it, the tenant has 6 months to officially give you a move out notice. Now, this can be tricky date wise. So if you feel like you're really going to run into this, make sure you take some notes. They have 6 months after receiving that notice to give you a move out notice. Keep in mind, this is just to give you the move out notice, and odds are, odds are you have a standard lease, which all it says is you have to give a minimum of a 30-day move out notice for a tenant. Sorry, the reason I'm a little distracted is because I'm actually thinking we should consider changing our leases to where it's a minimum of 30, but like a maximum of 60 or something like that. Because anyway, sorry, I'm thinking out loud. I'll follow up with TR Forms committee leader on that one. But what it basically means, they have 6 months to give you a notice. All of our standard leases, odds are, even if you made your own, your standard lease was only concerned about the maximum amount of time they give. You never really thought about the minimum amount of time. And so vast majority, if not all of our leases, say you have to give at least 30-day notice. So technically they could wait until 1 day prior to 6 months after you give the notice, and then give you a 2-year move out notice. Like technically the way this is written, that could happen, and the way the standard lease is written, that could happen. Highly unlikely that will happen. Highly unlikely that your tenant will even know or think about that as being a possibility, because that's coming from someone like myself who is in the midst of debating all these laws on a regular basis, and it just occurred to me that could happen. Anyways, after so tenant has 6 months to give the landlord a move out notice, which means you gave them a 90-day notice, right, to move out, whether and then 6 months after that they have to have given you a notice, which means if that full 9 months goes by, then legally the tenant owes you that relocation fee back, and it is treated just like what I just said, of a debt owed to a landlord, where you just have to give them a reasonable amount of time to pay. And then if they don't, you can give them a 1430 termination notice, which means you have 14 days to pay it in addition to the original reasonable amount of time I gave you. Or on the 30th day, you're evicted, and we get to file the eviction proceedings. During that amount total time, that 9 months, you gave them a 3-month notice of a rent increase. They're still required for the remaining 6 months to pay that rent increase amount. It does not, them saying, hey, I need a relocation fee and I'm going to move, that does not negate their requirement to pay the higher rent the moment that it goes into effect at least 90 days later. All right. I think we got that straightforward. Doesn't look like we got any questions. Relocation fee exemptions. So if you're serving the no cause notice or you're raising the rent, then you qualify for the relocation fee exemption. Or sorry, you qualify for owing the relocation fee. If you serve a no cause notice, then there are a handful of exemptions to where you might be able to avoid paying the relocation fee for serving the no cause notice. And one thing that I will say now, and I'll want him to post it towards the end as well, if Patrick could post these, we do, Portland Area Rental Owners Association, we do have a form store, and we have a complete form store for Portland specific properties. So if you go to the form store, which Patrick will post a link to that here any second. If you go to the form store, go there, there's a little filter link that you can click of Portland only forms, and it will only show you forms that are approved for the city of Portland. Obviously, the rent increase notice is one of them. And then the no cause notice, to where you may or may not have one of these exemptions. The other thing to look up, which Patrick will put in there, is our bookstore. On the bookstore, one of the most important things we have, in my opinion, is the law book, which actually breaks down not just Oregon State and City of Portland laws and ordinances, exactly how they're written, but also breaks it down into layman's terms, to where it's understandable of how you use it and when you use it. And then we also have the brand new forms manual, which basically, it's not a way for you to print any forms you want. It is actually a manual. I'm not kidding you. It's easily like 1.5 to 2 inches thick. And it is a breakdown of all of our forms, not just how to use them and how to fill them out, which is quite honestly important. Like, I get hired for eviction services. One of the number one things I have to do about 75% of the time is go back and redo the forms of that landlord that hired me or owner that hired me, because simple things like you misspell the tenant's name, but also simple things like there's different forms actually calculate time differently. Yeah, welcome to being a landlord in Oregon. It's freaking confusing. Sorry. But nonetheless, that form manual is very helpful. Quite honestly, if someone actually read through and was able to internalize 50% of the forms manual and the law or HA law book, you would have a better understanding of Oregon landlord tenant law in Oregon and Portland, better than most landlord or attorneys, even for sure landlords. So anyways, all right. So if you give a no cause notice, or even if you're raising the rent, which the first one is really the only one, well, I guess the first two, a couple actually, anyways, all right, forget what I just said. So there are exemptions to the City of Portland relocation fee ordinance. Exemptions are, number one, if you decide to rent your property on a week-to-week tenancy, so short term as far as the law is concerned. If you rent it out on a week-to-week or less tenant residency, then you actually have to follow a completely separate section of law. I'm not an expert in that law. I have definitely hired property managers or our vacation rentals that are experts in that law. I personally am not, so don't ask me specific questions on that. With that said, Tia, who heads up our free landlord helpline for members, if you join the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, I think it's just portlandarearoa.com, if I remember right. If you haven't already, Patrick, go ahead and post that one too. I don't know if we posted it or not. But if you join there, you get free access to the landlord helpline. Tia, who mans that for us, is actually really well experienced in this and can walk you through that. If you are thinking, oh, hey, if I rent it out on a week-by-week basis, that skips all these laws and I don't have to worry about it. Make sure you really research it first. For instance, one thing I do know about an area that I'm not an expert in, hence the disclaimer. One thing I do know is you can't charge a security deposit. There's a lot of limitations when it comes to like move out expenses and things like that, to where if you want to go that route to avoid these laws, you can do it. But let's just say this, I don't recommend any of my clients within my business actually take that course of action, because the things you are giving up as protections or rights as a landlord are, in my opinion, don't outweigh it. But just know that is an option worth researching if you really want to go down that road. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. As I'm going through these exemptions, one of the things you'll see is the exemption form required or not, no exemption form required. This is, if you go to the Portland Housing Bureau Rental Services Committee office website, you'll see there's an exemption form. In order to get the exemptions that I talk about over the next few slides that say an exemption form is required, means that prior to you renting out the unit, you need to apply for this exemption, get approval, and have a copy of that approval letter to provide to any potential tenants. Okay. So when it says no exemption form required, there isn't one. You don't have to do a single thing other than just tell your tenants, I qualify for this exemption. Week to week, I already talked about that. When a landlord occupies the same dwelling as a tenant. So this means that your principal resident is the owner. It says landlord in the law, it means owner. Okay, so me as a licensed property manager technically falls under the definition of landlord, doesn't qualify for this. It's only the actual owner of the property that I represent that would qualify for this. And it has to be their principal residence for 6+ months. So this means, based on state law and their definition of all this stuff, means that in order to qualify for that exemption, you as the owner of the property have to live in the property for a minimum of 6 months plus one, right? So a minimum of 50%, greater than 50% of the year. And you have to actually share indoor common space with your tenants. So what is meant for is the, 5-bedroom, 6-bath home, to where you live in the master bedroom, you rent out a couple bedrooms within your home. There's hallways, there's kitchens, there's everything. There's no physical walls that separate you and your tenants, making it a duplex or triplex or fourplex. Okay. So you actually have to share living space with your tenants to qualify for that. Next one is the tenant occupies a duplex or an ADU unit when a landlord principal residence is the second unit. So what this comes down to is you have a tax lot that has 2 units, period. Okay. It says duplex or ADU, but the reality is it matters on the tax lot. So if you've got the rural property, which I don't know if there are any in the city limits of Portland, there probably aren't, but let's say you have the rural property that's 2 separate single family homes. You live in one, you rent out the other, you're exempt. If you have a duplex, or you've got a single family home and you built an ADU and you rented that out, or you've got a single family home to where you're renting out a space and you're renting out just one other space, blah, blah, blah. Basically, there's 2 total rental units, long-term rental units on this tax lot. Then you are exempt for that one extra rental unit. If you own other rental units that are not on that tax lot, they are not exempt. It's only the one you share property with your principal residence. The exemption form is required, which means prior to you renting out that extra unit to any tenant, you need to apply to the City of Portland Rail Services office and get that exemption form. I have instructions and information on that in the shared class materials, but honestly, you're best off waiting until the last slide, looking up the Rail Service Office website, finding the exemption form, filling it out with them, rather than trusting that mine that is 1 day old is 100% accurate. Must be a principal resident for 6+ months. It was also the same for the last thing. Basically, it means don't use it as a damn gray area, please. Don't make it harder for the rest of us landlords. Just use this if it's a real thing. Don't say, oh yeah, I'm living there, so I'm running out for you. And then for the next one, go, oh yeah, I'm living the other one, I run out for you, and you're lying, or you don't spend a full 6 months there. Please don't. Like, for guys like me that represent you in the Rental Services Committee at the City of Portland, the Legislative Committee at the state level for the RHA, which is the only one that's actually listened to. Unfortunately, what Multifamily Northwest and RHA Oregon tell you is false. No one at the state level actually gives a shit about them. Sorry, guys, if any of you represent them, but it is true. RHA has been there for 50 years, when you guys only started a few years ago. So it is what it is. But in all of that stuff, I would say it is very important. Please follow these rules. Don't use them as gray area. Don't try to edge past it. It makes our job so much harder to get laws passed that are in your favor, or at the very least to grind down the sharp edges of the laws that we have no choice are going to be passed against your favor. Let's see here. As I already said, you have to get the exemption form. Once you get that, you get an exemption acknowledgement letter, and that's what you have to provide the tenant prior to them signing the lease. Yes, leases signed prior to this bill taking effect in March of 2018 are grandfathered. I was about to say I should take that off, but technically, man, I mean, technically, if this is an issue to where you think one of these exemptions are something you may or may not be able to take advantage of, to be perfectly honest, if you still have a lease that was signed prior to 3/8 of 2018, it might not be a horrible idea to not update them. Again, don't take my opinion right there. I'm just thinking out loud. Run that by someone smarter than me, but there might actually be a little bit of a benefit if you are someone that hasn't updated your lease anytime soon, which is 100% contradictory to the advice I normally give, which is every single year laws change, please update your lease. So take it for what it's worth. Next exemption, if the landlord temporarily rents out their principal residence for up to 3 years. If this is only for, you know it ahead of time, i.e. you're going over states or overseas to teach, you know, in China or Japan or whatever it is, you're doing something that will take 3 years or less, and you know that, and that's the only reason that you're renting out your unit, because after that you intend to move back into it. Then there is an option for you, assuming you take action ahead of time. You have to fill out the exemption form and get it approved, have the acknowledgement letter to provide to the tenant. You can only use it once every 36 months. Basically, that's in there to guard against those of you that might be using this as a loophole. After excuse me, sorry guys, after whatever date you say the tenant has to move out, they actually move out. You have up to 60 days after that to actually move in. As far as enforcement goes, as if anyone's concerned, it's on the tenant to find out and sue you over it, which if that happens, and they do, pay them money quick, because you probably lost if you actually violated it, obviously. You also must occupy it for at least 12 months after the fact. Technically, if you're occupying it after 12 months and you have legitimate life circumstances that makes it to where you actually have no choice but to move, and a tenant sues you over this, you'd probably have a defense and an argument. Again, I'm not an attorney. That is not legal advice. Also only applies if you have 4 or less units. So this is important to point out. This is not a standard exemption. A lot of people are confused. They think because of the state law has an exemption where you don't have to pay that relocation fee if you have 4 or less long-term rental units owned within the state of Oregon. That is very different than this. This is not a standard across the board exemption. That is for this one exemption that you only get to claim this exemption of I'm leaving, I'm only renting out for 3 or less years. I qualify for this, please approve me. If you have 4 or less rental units, if you happen to own 5 rental units, which if you own a 5-bedroom unit property to where you rent out each bedroom on its own lease, that's 5 units and you don't qualify, just an FYI. If that is the case, you only qualify for this exemption. You have 4 or less units when you decide to move out of your main dwelling and you're planning on moving back into it in 3 years. Let's see here. Must private zone. Talked about this stuff. All right, we're good. Next exemption. If you temporarily rent out your principal residence during an absence due to active duty military service. Just to make this slide nice and quick and clear, it is exactly the same as the last slide, except for there is no 3-year limit on it. It could be any amount of time as long as you can prove I'm being moved. I have to move because of active duty, and it's going to take me 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or 1 year or 6 years. Doesn't matter, whatever amount it is. If it's 100% due to you being an active duty military personnel, then that amount of time is what you should be approved for. Again, you have to go through, fill out the form, send it to the Portland Housing Bureau and Services Office, get it approved, have the document to provide your tenants, et cetera, et cetera. Good question, Anonymous. So on the last slide, let me go back to it real quick. Oh, it's also on the next slide. It said if you have 4 or less units. Anonymous asks, up to 4 units under one LLC, or does the city calculate all LLCs together? They calculate them all together. That was actually something, it was when this law was first passed, it was successfully argued by a tenant, and therefore they quickly changed the administrative rules to where it means when you own 4 units in the state of Oregon, any amount of ownership at all counts. So even if, I'll give you a couple of extreme examples, and I'm glad you asked that question because normally I talk about this and apparently I forgot it. A couple extreme examples. Maybe you own a few shares in a large, shit, now I can't even think about it. Sorry about my language. The type of shares to where it's a, you buy into it and they bought a ton of different stocks, blah, blah, blah. Or let's go to the even more extreme. Let's say there's that rental property, that duplex in Salem where Willamette University is, or PSU or OSU, or, well, actually, no, screw that. We're talking about Portland right now. PSU. You've got that son or daughter that's going to PSU in the city of Portland. You decide, I'm going to buy a duplex, but just to help my kid out, I'm going to make it to where, yeah, I'm paying for it, but they're 99% owner and I'm 1%, or even 1% of 1% of 1%. Doesn't matter. If you have any ownership at all in a single unit within the city limits of Portland, it counts. So you could have 0.000000001% ownership in a 5-plex in Portland, and you officially own 5 units and you're not exempt. So what if wife owns 3 units and husband owns 2 units, but wife manages all 5? Okay. As far as I'm aware, Portland and even state law like SB 608 that has an exemption for 4 or less units within the state of Oregon. As far as I'm aware, both of them would count you and your wife owning separate ownership the same as you having separate LLCs, to where if there is, what this comes down to, let me actually, this is a better way to answer it. What this comes down to is what can a tenant attorney prove or convince a judge of? And if you have a husband and wife, or you've got multiple LLCs, but taxes are all commingled, funds are all commingled, ultimately, the husband and wife benefit from it financially. Even if taxes are separate, they still have a husband and wife bylaw in the state of Oregon, which means their assets are combined. There's no way around it. If your wife owns 3 and you own 2, you own 5 as far as this law is concerned. Obviously, you and your attorney maybe should talk about what the actual penalty is and negative repercussions are, and then decide whether or not it's a good or bad financial decision for you. Personally, I've always ran my businesses of, I've had my bookkeepers and lawyers tell me, oh, no, you can't do that. It's illegal. My next question is, what does it cost me? If it costs me $200, okay, worth the risk. I want to run my business out and want to run it. If it's going to cost me thousands of dollars plus possible legal fees, then, oh yeah, you're right. I don't care what I want to do it that way. So, unfortunately, Leah, I don't think, if I were in your shoes, I own 3 units, my wife owned 2, and which I guess technically I'm above that, but whatever. I would not count on this as a loophole, personally. Let's see here. What if you own 1 rental in 3 different states, including 1 in Oregon and the 13-plex in Washington? State 1 is in Arizona. Does not matter. All that matters for what we're talking about today is the number of units you own within the city limits of Portland. If you're talking about state law SB 608, which I'm not talking about today, but just so you know, all that matters is what are the long-term rental units you own within the state of Oregon. Outside of the city laws, outside of the state laws, they don't have jurisdiction and they're not supposed to matter. I say supposed to just simply because tenant lawsuits, sometimes if they really just dig their heels in the sand, can get escalated from court of appeals to higher level of court of appeals. And who knows what's going to happen. But as far as I understand the laws that are concerned, the only thing that matters is the number of units you own within the city limits of Portland, for what we're talking about today, and within the state limits of the state of Oregon for SB 608. Next exemption. If you move in on a relocation fee exemption, if you're going to give a 90-day notice, they've got to move out. And the reason is that a adult family member, immediate family member, is going to move in and make it their primary residency. Now, something to really point out here. This is very different than the state law that allows you to give a no-cause notice if you or your family member are going to move in. This does not include you. So for the city of Portland, if you want to sell that single family home rental, you do not have a loophole or even the option. Forget about loophole. Let me stop assuming you're trying to break the law. If you decide, I want that tenant to move out because I want to live in it and I own it, that is not a qualifying reason. You still have to pay them the relocation fee for the city of Portland. But if any of your immediate family members, which I have a list at the bottom of all the immediate family members by this definition, something I want to make very clear, don't trust me, don't trust this slide. If you have an adult family member that's going to move in and you think you qualify for this exemption, Number one, you have to apply and get qualified before the tenant moves in. So it's already kind of built in. But also two, whether it's city laws, state laws, or federal laws, within the first one or two sections of the law, that law's actual text is a section that is the definition of terms, which FYI is the dictionary for that law and that law alone. So for instance, immediate family member for this City of Portland ordinance can absolutely 100% have a completely definition of who qualifies as immediate family member than the state law under SB 608 that has its own definition of immediate family member. Okay, so the reason I say all of that is to say, number one, if you personally want to move into it, it does not qualify as an exemption. You still have to pay the City of Portland relocation fee. Number two, if it's not you and it's any of your family members, please look up the actual current text that day of the city law or state law or both that apply and their definitions of immediate family member. The reason I say that, this has been a law for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, something like that. As far as I know, they have not changed the definition of immediate family member. With that said, it does not take a vote of city council or state legislatures. All it takes is a vote of the committee that oversees the administrative rules for this particular law, which is not something that is typically reported on the news or that would ever be forced in front of your face so that you know. So if you think you're going to qualify for this, you have a family member that's going to move in, please do me a favor, spend 10 minutes, do a quick Google search online for that exact law. Like I said, it's within the first section of the second section. Typically is a definition of terms. Look up the term immediate family member and read that and make sure you still qualify, because there is a decent chance that the law changes and there's no reason you would even know, unfortunately. Technically, you can only use the exemption once every 36 months. That's just to protect against people that says, oh yeah, my son's going to move in. Then he sleeps there for 2 days and then moves out and is gone. A lot of these rules are just things to protect against that. I already said immediate family cannot be an owner. So for instance, if you own that, let's say duplex in downtown Portland, or the condo, whatever, downtown Portland, your kids going to PSU, and you decided to go ahead and give them, 1% ownership or something to help with their credit and their, just in life, it's good to be able to do that. That doesn't count for this exemption at that point, because they are now an owner of any kind. Doesn't matter the percentage. It could be 0.00000 infinite 0%. As long as there's a 1 at the end of that infinite zeros, it counts. Let's see here. Landlord cannot live in the unit for at least 24 months. So if you use this as, again, just closing a loophole, plain and simple, you can't say, oh yeah, so-and-so is going to live in it, and then they live in it for a month and then you move into it. You as the owner, when it says landlord, it also means owner. You as the owner cannot actually live in that unit for 24 months if you use this as an excuse. The immediate family member, they have to move in within 60 days. Has to become their primary residence, which within Oregon is basically they have to actually sleep there at least 50% of the nights in a 365-day calendar year. They have to intend to occupy the unit for at least 24 months. And that is if it is someone, say at PSU, and after the first year they flunk out and they have no choice but to move, then you're okay, because they intended to live there for 24 months, but don't push it. Okay, let's do, so, all right, we're gonna do one more just quick 5-minute break and we'll be right back. All right, finish this up. Got that. All right, so next, if your unit is rendered immediately uninhabitable, you don't need an exemption form, you need to apply for it. Plain and simple. If you're asking a tenant to move out because no fault of their own, but because the plumbing doesn't work or the electricity doesn't work, or basically it doesn't meet habitability standards, then you are allowed to ask them to move out without having to pay the city of Portland relocation fee. If the unit is being going to be demolished, this one's more straightforward than you'd probably think. Plain and simple. If you are going to wipe the building off the property and either sell it as a vacant lot or build something completely new, i.e., you have to actually apply for a demolition permit with the city of Portland, then this is allowed without paying a relocation fee. You have to fill out the exemption form ahead of time. This has to be you're renting it to someone when you know you're going to demolish it, but they want to live there for 6 months or less. So highly unlikely you're going to run into it. And you need to provide a copy of the actual demolition permit itself. You don't have to wait until the demolition permit is approved, because that can take 3 to 6 months. But you have to have actually filed the demolition permit and be able to provide a copy of it in order to be approved to rent out that unit to a tenant for 6 months prior to demolishing it. If you intend to sell the dwelling or convert to another use, be careful before you get excited about this, because it's one of the number one things I get asked about, and one of the number one things I got hired to do as a realtor that represents people that are trying to sell their rental unit with a tenant that's located in it, which is pretty much the only properties I actually specialize in helping people sell. So if you have one of those, that's right up my alley. But this is, you know, ahead of time, before you rent it out to someone, that you're going to sell the dwelling or you're going to convert it to another use, i.e., you're going to turn that single family home on Hawthorne into a dentist's office or accountant office or something like that. It's commercial, right? Or you intend to sell the dwelling. Again, this is not, you've owned a rental for a number of years, and now today you decided, I want to move back into it. Or sorry, not I want to move. I want to sell it as part of my thing. No. You need to know this prior to moving a tenant in. And you need to be able to fill out the exemption form, file it with the city of Portland Housing Marijuana Services Office, and get your approval from them and be able to provide that, a copy of that, to any potential tenant that wants to move in prior to them occupying the unit. The tenant must move out within 24 months, which means you can't have more than a 2-year lease, i.e., and the sale or the conversion of it must happen within 60 days of the tenant moving out. So pretty long stretch, because quite honestly, if the sale is going to actually close and happen within 60 days of the tenant moving out, you definitely don't want their move out date to be the date that you list it for sale. You'd want their move out date to be at least 1, if not a couple months before you list it, or you want their move out date to be at least 1, if not 2 months prior to their move out date is when you want to list it for sale. So that way, hopefully you get a buyer. Average closing time is anywhere from 30 to 90 days these days, and you'll still meet these obligations. But again, it's one of those things to where, yes, it's an exemption that's in there, but if your idea is, hopefully I'll just sell this someday, unfortunately, it's not an exemption for you. You'll either have to wait for the tenant to move out, or just accept that as part of being able to sell it, you're gonna have to pay them the relocation fee. Not saying I agree with it one way or another, it just is what it is. If you as a landlord violate any of the conditions of the relocation fee ordinance that we talked about today, then you're going to owe that tenant up to 3 times the monthly rent, as well as actual damages, relocation assistance, reasonable attorney fees, etc., etc. So if you violate these laws, you don't pay that relocation. You still have to owe the relocation fee. Then you owe the tenant 3 times whatever the rent is. Plus, if the tenant actually had to hire an attorney to force you to do this, you get to pay the attorney fees. So I cannot stress enough, please don't be the landlord that's made an example of. Please don't violate this law if there's any way around it. If nothing else, hire an attorney, hire a landlord property manager like myself to help you out. It's just, it's not worth it dollar wise. And also it really hurts the rest of us landlords that are just, we're really just trying our hardest to fight these legislative things that are going against us. And any landlords that actually just intentionally violate the law, you're not helping. You're making it worse for the rest of us. I'm not saying at all, please don't, don't obscure me, don't grill me in the public media, but I don't at all necessarily agree with these laws. But dear God, please make my job easier on creating laws that are better for you landlords by not intentionally violating them. It just, yeah, the vast majority of landlords are actually good people. We raise rents by 5% or less every year. Like, we don't want to evict anyone. Actually, we profit the most by people staying in there. So please don't be one of those landlords that does the opposite and makes it harder for the rest of us. Last thing, City of Portland wants to make a couple last things. So City of Portland wants to make sure I include in these classes. If you have a rental property within the City of Portland, you need to be registering it every year. If you don't know already, you need to talk to your tax accountant. You should actually be filing City of Portland business license tax returns every year. If you have one single rental unit, if you live in a home where you rent out a bedroom, you qualify for this and need to be filing the City of Portland taxes every year. Granted, you have to make a certain amount before you actually pay taxes. So lots of times you're just filing a postcard that says, hey, I didn't make enough. I don't owe you any money, other than that one rental unit you have costs you $60. For every rental door you have, you need to pay a $60 per unit rental registration fee. This is something I referenced earlier in the class. If you have that like 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, outskirts of City of Portland, downtown area home, and you rent out each bedroom on its own separate lease, then you owe $300 a year in unit registration fees. But if you take that one home, you rent it out to 5 separate roommates that, with the expertise of a property manager like myself, you're able to do the proper addendums and everything to swap in and out roommates as they come and go. All of a sudden, that is a 5-bedroom home that's rented on one lease, $60 a year. Not necessarily saying it is a reason to manage your property that way, but it is something to consider when you're running the numbers and deciding how you want to rent it out. Mediation. There is a pilot mediation program being funded by the City of Portland. Please use it if you have any use for it. If you have issues with your tenant, or you're a tenant that have issues with your landlord, and you think things might be resolved by people, working things out, not having lawyers being allowed to attend, things like that, definitely reach out to the mediation program. Lastly, before I lose too many of you, save this contact information and these websites and these email addresses. Portland Housing Bureau and the Rental Services Office for the City of Portland. If you have a rental property within the city limits of Portland, you should reach out to them. If you have anything in the gray area, let them know. There's a good chance their response is going to be, we can't give legal advice. We don't know the answer. But I can promise you, from someone that has worked with these employees on the back end, not as someone on their team, so to speak, but just on committees to where I expect them to do things and stuff, they keep track of that stuff. So if you, as landlords, if they get 100 calls this month or of the last couple of months over this one specific issue that's super confusing, needs some clarification, at the rental services committee meetings that I chair, to where we give official recommendations to city council to change those laws, we will get reports on that. I'm not saying that your one phone call, I'll hear about it next month. I'm just saying, please don't hesitate to call or email them and say, here's my issue. Here's the problem. Here's my question marks. Here's the gray area. Here's what I need clarification on, because all that stuff, whether or not you get the response that you actually want or you want to hear, it is at least accounted for. And I can't promise that it's going to change a single thing in the future, but if there is a chance of something changing that is, realistic of, no, this is a real problem that lots of landlords are having trouble with, the more of you to contact them and report it, the higher likelihood it is it ends up on my committee meeting agenda, and therefore ends up possibly on the city council agenda. Who knows, maybe it makes a change. So don't get me wrong, I don't want to get your hopes up. I don't want you to think I'm promising anything, but please report it. If you have questions, you have concerns, you have issues, talk about it. Also, every other month, this year, so it's not every month, but every other month, we have a rental services committee meeting, public committee meeting for the city of Portland. Go on the Portland Housing Bureau website, the rental services help desk website, find out when those are. If you're a landlord or a tenant, doesn't matter. But if you're someone that has an opinion on these, on any direction, doesn't matter, good or bad, you can agree with me, you can hate me, doesn't matter. If you have an opinion at all, please, if you can, make time to join those rental service committee meetings and sign up for public comment, because that's one of the main reasons the rental service committee was created, was simply so that the public had a place to give their public comment, stress their issues with landlord tenant related issues within the city of Portland, and therefore they can eventually turn into recommendations, go to the city council. So please do help out the best you can. On that, any of you that were expecting continuing education credits, please do an end of class check-in now in the webinar chat. Also, keep an eye out for follow-up emails, whether you sign up through the Portland Rental Owners Association or rpmeducation.org. Either way, you should be getting a follow-up email either today or tomorrow. There's a couple different links in there for you. One of them is so that you can give a anonymous review on this class for the grant reporting, which is what, quite honestly, your positive reports on that and positive reviews on that is what helps us continue to get these classes renewed every year and continue to bring you typically, anywhere from 1 to 2 classes every month for free, paid for by the city of Portland. The other link in that email is, hey, if you feel like you learned something, you felt like this is worth your time at the very least, then if you could click that link, leave us rpmeducation.org a 5-star Google review. That's where it helps us the most. You can also find us on Facebook, leave us reviews there, all that stuff. So, all right, I have talked my head off. Doesn't look like I've got any additional Q&A questions. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. Oh, Dale just snuck in a long question right there. Look at you go. All right, I'll answer this one, then I'll end it. And like I said, we'll send everyone recordings of the class after the fact. All right, so Dale asked, my overriding concern regards what isn't readily expressed. What about the rental reference form required to be provided by landlords whenever they give any termination notice, including a for-cause termination? Not providing this notice puts a landlord in violation, with the penalty being 3 times the rent, right? I believe that was changed to 250, but it doesn't matter, it's a penalty. Why aren't these types of traps talked more about? And are there other nuances like this land? So what I would say, Dale, is one of the other like 5 different class topics that the city of Portland grant pays for is on this specifically, which is on the screening, the screening ordinance within the city of Portland. I would be surprised if we didn't have it next month. If not, it'll be the month after that. Also, if you go to the rental services office online, you can find stuff on that. But basically what you're talking about is what about the rental reference form required to be provided by landlords when they would give any termination notice, including a for-cause termination? So the rental reference form, what you're specifically talking about, I'm going to say it's 2 years worth. I feel like it's 12 months. And yes, I am showing my cards that I do my own research and educate myself on classes right before I teach them. So that is a class that I teach. It is very specific. It absolutely has the answer in it. right off the top of my head right this second without looking it up. I'm not 100% sure. It's at least 12 months. It might be 24. I feel like it's only 12 though. Either way, what you're talking about is the rental reference of you just simply giving them an accounting of what they have actually paid on time or not over the last 12 or 24 months. I think it's 12, but 12 or 24 months. For that thing, I believe, I want to say that's part of the fair ordinance, and the penalties for that were recently dropped from 3 times a month's rent to $250 per penalty. But who cares about that? All that really matters is that you follow the law, right? And you don't get penalized. You don't have to possibly pay attorney fees on top of it and all that stuff. But it really is just a matter of if a tenant gives you notice, or you give a tenant notice, whether it's for cause eviction or not, then you have to provide a rental reference that shows in the last 12, maybe 24, but let's call it 12 months, that of what they have, what they've done payment wise, whether they've paid on time every month, they haven't paid on time every month. If they haven't paid on time every month, which months did they not pay on time and what date did they pay on? Basically an accounting of the last 12 months. If you are a property management company like myself that has online property management software and stuff, your tenants always have access to a tenant ledger to where they always have that, and you're already abiding by that even if you didn't know it. If you are your own individual property manager, excuse me, if you take my class on the move out ordinances and everything, or you simply go to the rental services office website, you can get a blank form that is literally just line by line the last like 12 months of this month they paid this much on this date, and that's what you need. Or do it in a Word document or an Excel document and just line it out, and you're abiding by that. But yes, as far as why are other traps talked about more, I would say, Dale, stick with me. If you stick with me, you take my classes on a regular basis, I will end up pointing out the majority of those traps, so to speak, or just, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, just work we freaking need to do as landlords if we want to be landlords in Oregon. I'm not saying whether that's a good or a bad thing. It's up to you whether or not, how much work it's worth for that investment. But nonetheless, I'll also say, if it's too stressful, too much trouble, that's why guys like me have job security and would love to manage your property. Leah asks, looks like the last question before I cut things off. If you rent a residential property to a sober living company, okay, I get that. I've done that before, rather than a person/family, does it make any difference in what landlord/tenant laws apply? No. Okay. Leah, I will tell you, 100% honestly, I'm not someone that exaggerates. I'm 90% sure, which means that 10% unsure is real. Okay. It's worth maybe doing a little bit of research, but I am 90+% sure, because I've ran into organizations like that to where, like, we had a sixplex down in Salem, to where it wasn't really six, but it was a tax lot that had 6 units on it. They were all separate, none of them were attached. And 2 of them were rented by, I don't know, best word, essentially a halfway house company, organization that help people like that. They're on the better track. And from what I remember, when we did that and we ran everything by our attorneys and everything like that, we had our lease with the parent company, and all of their tenants, everyone they put in there was still held to the same standards as all of their tenants, and there were absolutely no differences whatsoever. I would say when doing that, if you do that, I would strongly recommend creating your own addendum and or possibly, I mean, quite honestly, because those are probably long-term stuff. There's probably enough profit in it for you to justify this. Maybe run the addendum by a landlord attorney in the area and just make sure it is well, sorry, I'm talking a lot to say, an addendum that basically makes it clear that it's not just that company that's responsible, it's anyone they choose to put there is also responsible for all the terms of your contract and lease. That would probably be the only addition or change that I would say, which, I mean, if it was within my own company, I'd be, I don't know, 75% confident in just typing up my own addendum with a couple paragraphs that basically says, hey, you're signing this, but anyone and everyone that you choose to let live there is your responsibility, and you will be the one that is evicted, which includes them. And then also one of the benefits that helps you is if you ever have to do an eviction, the term et al, et space al, is something it's automatically hard coded into all of the landlord eviction forms that we sell through the Portland area roa.com website and the form store there. But that basically makes it to where, like in a situation like this, you would have a lease with the corporate company. You would list them on the violation notice with et al, which is hard coded into all of our notices. But if you made your own, you'd write et al. And basically what that means is, yeah, the corporation is evicted, but also if I have to go all the way to the point of hiring the sheriff and I show up at the front door with the damn sheriff, the sheriff has the legal right to remove any physical body that exists in that unit at that time. And I get to change the locks and lock every physical body that wants to access that unit out of it. So hopefully, long way to explain that I think you're okay. Just make sure you've got a solid addendum just to connect the two, to where if you evict the corporation, you're also evicting anyone that happens to exist in the unit. So hopefully that helps. Thank you everyone for the kind words. Remember to send us a good 5-star Google review if you can. Otherwise, hopefully, or not just otherwise, just in general, hopefully I'll see you guys at some of our upcoming classes. Thank you very much.